Before the Riderflex podcast episode of the day, a quick word from our sponsor and friends at Marketing 360.
Try the #1 marketing platform for small business. Everything you need from design to marketing to CRM. Learn more at marketing360.com. Marketing 360. Fuel your brand.
Tell me, we're not live, by the way, recording, but yeah, we'll just roll with it. We're chatting already, so we'll just go with it. Rob, tell us about your personal life a little bit before we get into business and entrepreneurial stuff. Give us the background. Where'd Rob grow up? Maybe some family history, stuff like that.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So I grew up here in Port Angeles, Washington. So it's a small little community up on the Olympic Peninsula, about 2 hours away from Seattle. I have an older brother, older sister, and younger sister. So I'm one of four. Okay. And graduated high school here in Port Angeles. Did my undergrad in Oregon at Pacific University, and then just started doing a lot of travel and ultra endurance sports and teaching kind of from then on.
Were you an athlete in high school and college? I mean, were you super in shape and all that then, or you didn't start that till after college?
I started getting involved with in sports probably pretty heavy my freshman year of high school. So I did 3 sports a year, so football, wrestling, and track. So pretty active, not outstanding in anything, like a decent athlete, but nothing really outstanding, except for wrestling. Like wrestling was kind of my main sport. Cool. So I did that through high school and college, and wrestled a couple tours internationally with Athletes in Action.
Really?
Freestyle and Greco. Yeah.
Wow. Were you a 4-year wrestler? I mean, a 4-year on the team in college as a wrestler?
Yeah, I wrestled 2 years and then had a shoulder injury going into my junior year. So I coached at the middle school the last couple of years.
Okay. Wow, man. Hey, my boys were wrestlers, so I'm very familiar. Both my boys were state placers in high school, so we were a wrestling family, so I get it.
Yeah.
A lot of dedication goes into that sport for people that don't know.
Yeah, no, I found that, and it's kind of one of those jokes, like after wrestling, everything else is easy. I feel like the discipline and the, kind of stick to itness and consistency that you learn from wrestling and having to perform when you're exhausted and tired, just sticks with you for the rest of your life and whatever you take on.
No doubt about it. My boys always used to tell me football practice was easy compared to wrestling. Were you going to be a teacher? Was that the plan originally? I mean, I looked at, your degree and so forth and kind of was studying your history. Were you thinking you were going to teach, or what was your plan?
Yeah, my family background is, a lot of family members in teaching and then entrepreneurship. So my plan was to go into teaching. I wanted to do that for 3 to 5 years, and then go into administration. So I got my master's in teaching in 2009. And was planning on teaching business and marketing at the high school level. And then right when everything kind of collapsed, all the business, or in the 2008 recession, like the business teacher position just got dried up. So there just wasn't any openings. And that's when I went back for my MBA and my leadership degree.
Okay. So you changed direction a little bit. Were you going to be a teacher / wrestling coach? Probably. Yes, that's probably what would have happened, huh?
Yeah. Yep. Like the idea of teacher / wrestling coach.
Okay, so when you went back to get your master's degree, did you have a plan then? Did you know what you wanted to do professionally?
I'd still kind of had the idea of teaching at the high school / college level. I'd always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I remember thinking, if I ever got my MBA, I'd kind of screwed up in life, because you don't need an MBA to be a business leader. And so I remember after like going back and getting my MBA, it was a little bittersweet, because it was kind of pushing off that dream of being an entrepreneur in my 20s, and not knowing if I'd come back to it. And then I got an opportunity to teach through the local college here, Peninsula College. So I taught a business and entrepreneurship program. And so after doing that for a couple of years, that kind of got me, in the teaching field and thinking about entrepreneurship. And then when I got married in 2014 and moved to LA, that was when I started my first like big company, where we actually kind of went all in and moved forward.
Okay, so let me ask you this: entrepreneur-wise, was your dad, did he own his own company, or you had who in the family was a business owner?
Yeah, so my dad owned a pizza restaurant in town, so Pizza Tavern. So he had a bunch. I grew up. They had like pinball machines and a jukebox, and they sold a fair amount of
Cool.
food and alcohol. So yeah, so I grew up in
Cool.
that from, up until I was about 8 years old, down at the family restaurant.
He sold it?
Yeah. I sold it when I was I think I was 8 years old, and then moved over to Eastern Washington.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. What did he do after that? Was he a business owner after that, or he went to work for somebody else?
Yeah, I went to work for somebody else. So yeah, he got into a lot of different kind of odd jobs, was doing long haul trucking for a while. And then he ended up retiring the last 10 years of his life down in Mexico. So down in Ensenada. So I used to head down a couple times a year and spend a week with him just on the beach. So yeah.
Very cool. Okay. That's not bad, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Like, so you moved to LA. Now, did you move to LA because you got married? Was your wife's family from there? Why did you move?
Yeah. So I met my wife on eHarmony. I think that was in
Cool.
2010.
All
And
right,
then
that's pretty neat.
yeah. So I was kind of just chasing after her for about 2-3 years, doing the long distance thing. I had taught for a year up here in Washington, and then I moved down to LA so we could be in the same city to date. And then ended up struggling finding a job. Did personal training for a year in Santa Barbara. Had a great experience, but you don't make a lot of money. And then I got offered a teaching gig again for 1 year. So I got engaged, came back, taught for a year. And then when I went back down, that's when we started our business in LA. And my wife is from Fortuna, so up in the Redwoods. But she had moved to LA because she got a job at Tom's Shoes. So she was the global givings account kind of on the giving team at Tom's. So she did that for, I think, like 7 years.
Okay.
And
she did that for 7 years before you guys started the business. Before you started the business.
So she was doing that when I first, when we were dating. So she got that job when we started dating, and then we got married, and she did that for about 4 years while we were married. And then she transitioned out. She's a Marie Kondo consultant. So she runs her own business, Modern Refresh. So does in-house personal organizing. It's this Japanese style, kind of minimalist.
Okay. And then how did you guys decide to start a business? Like, walk me through that.
Yeah. So when I was looking at moving to Los Angeles, my wife's best friend, Marilyn, her husband worked in the Hollywood. So he did a lot of movie trailers. So if you think of really high-end animation, like on Marvel Graphics or others, editing that footage together, doing some of the special effects. And he wanted to use that technology for science, engineering, and medical stuff. Like, he's like, how can we use that really high-end graphics to highlight things that have value and make a difference in the world? So I went down there, we would go out hiking and just kind of talk about it. And I talk about, like, I'm teaching business and entrepreneurship, and I had this background, and he had the skill set, and he's like, what if we went in and started a business together? So I ended up starting the business with Nick Lerum. So he was my wife's best friend's husband. And so we were the two co-founders of Lux Virtual.
I see. How'd you decide on the name, by the way?
We went through a lot of different iterations, and then he was trying to look for something with kind of power and meaning, and he liked Lux because of the kind of premium. There's that prestige that goes with it, and then Lux Virtual is like illuminating, which when you're doing animation, when you're doing renders, you're shining light. So it's that Lux, which is another word for light. And I think Latin, as he was looking at it. And so it's that light, that reflection that brings out the actual scene and the animation. So he loved that connection with, just the image of Lux and also the light reflecting. And then virtual, my business partner, Nick, really liked the idea of going into using that, the animations we're doing and pulling those into the virtual reality and augmented reality. So that was kind of the direction we were going, is building out these explainer videos and then shifting that into the virtual reality world as we built as a company.
Give us the 3-minute overview for the listeners. Lux Virtual. Just give us the pitch. Give us the elevator pitch. And by the way, for the listeners, it's luxvirtual.com. luxvirtual.com. Give us the 3-minute elevator pitch, Rob. Go for it.
So I love to kind of tell people the story. It's because we started as an animation studio, and then we shifted into a video production animation, and then we got involved in virtual reality, augmented reality, and then kind of moving into a full service marketing agency. But our focus has always been the same. It's building relationships and telling complex stories and illuminating brilliant ideas. And it's that, the thing that we do is solving that problem where creative or a business owner has this idea and they have a hard time getting it across, and they end up saying that same story over and over and over, trying to get around it from different angles. So what animated explainer videos do, or what really high quality creative visuals do, is they tell that story in a very succinct form, oftentimes in 15 seconds to 45 seconds. So for us, my role with Lux Virtual and what we do is basically building relationships to tell stories that move people either towards capturing an audience or towards capturing a funding round. So a lot of our clients are, companies that already have their first round of funding and they're going after their second round of funding. So we help tell their story and kind of pull together their visuals and their whole brand identity so that they can communicate that to their audience.
What is your role in the company between you and your co-founder? Are you on the biz dev side, or what's your side of it? How do you guys split up the main responsibilities?
Yeah, so I always tell people I do all the business development. So my role is just to talk to people. Like I spent a ton of time before COVID doing coffees and lunches, and it's just kind of talking to people and hearing their problems, and then kind of listening to them and being like, oh, they have these monkeys on their back, and then you're basically taking that monkey and you have a good solution, and then they give you a pot of money and you have the solution to fix it. And I always tell them hey, I'm going to make sure that it makes you look good either in front of your manager or in front of your investors or in front of your board. And so it's how do we solve this problem for you through this creative channel? So I do a lot of business. So my main role is business development, both on the client side and pulling together the teams. So building out those relationships with the freelancers and with different companies we partner with. And then just making sure that we deliver, on time, on scope, and kind of over deliver on budget. And so just. Yeah.
When you say full service marketing agency now, can you guys do everything in house, or are there certain things that you subcontract out, or how do you do that?
Yeah, it's an interesting approach. I've spent so much of my time, I have a background in ultra endurance sports, and I love the idea of essentialism or minimalism. And it's basically how do we get that MVP, that minimal viable product, or how do I train as little as possible to excel at some of the hardest races in the world? And I take that same approach to business. It's how can I put together teams as efficiently as possible so that we can have high impact without this massive overarching structure. So the way I do it in business, I call them strike teams. So I'll start to talk with the client. You kind of figure out what their need is. And, it's if they need a website redesign, if they need a logo, if they need an animated video, if they need blogs, if they need, whatever that kind of content is. And once you kind of listen through their problems, and then you suggest certain things, it's hey, have you guys thought about this route? And just making sure that they've thought through the whole scenario. And then I'll pull together a team with those skill sets, and usually in that field, if it's energy or technology or medical, you want to make sure that your creative team aligns with it as much as possible. And then I just kind of pull together the ad hoc team. And then I'll put a creative director and a strategist, and then we'll just kind of move forward on it.
Okay. Did you guys bootstrap the company? Just you and him together, I guess?
Yeah, we cash flowed it.
Okay.
And you grow at the speed of cash. So it's we go after projects, and as soon as we got them in, we'd update our equipment, and
Okay. No, you didn't take on any cash, and you haven't taken on any cash to this point.
No, we haven't taken any debt or any venture funds.
Congratulations. And you've been in operation for how many years? 7?
7 years. Yeah.
How many employees?
No. Well, I actually bought my business partner out 3 years ago. So it's just me. And then I work with about 30 freelancers.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So right now I probably have 15 people working on different projects.
What happened to your partner? He just decided he wanted out, or he's like, hey, I'm done with this. He's doing something else. What happened?
Yeah, we were about 3-4 years into it, and we're slowly getting more and more money, but we were at the point where he was making about half of what he could in industry, and he was just about to have his first kid. And also, as we were expanding, he loved being a part of the creative process and the whole thing. And as we were expanding, we were going into areas that he didn't have expertise, like some of the video production. And so we were pulling in a lot of freelancers and other companies and passing on projects to the clients that he didn't really have his hand in. And that process of not having creative control of it was, there was that. So there was the creative control aspect. There was the, it was taking us a while to get up to making what we would normally do if we had jobs. And then with the first kid, it was just a combination of things where, it didn't make sense for him to stay in it for that, at that point. And the nice thing is I've been able to keep in touch with him over the years. So he's one of my mentors. When a lot of projects come up, he's one of the interesting projects. He's one of the first ones I shoot it off to and, kind of bounce ideas around with. And my wife actually left this morning to go visit him and his wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Very, very good. All right. You brought up an interesting topic there that I want to touch on real quick for the listeners. If you're starting a business that is not funded right away, let's say, there's no VC money, there's no PE money, there's no angel money. You're bootstrapping it yourself, especially if it's a service business. The chances of you making a salary that matches what you could make in the open market is very slim, right? Not if you're not going to do that at first. I mean, there will be, you should expect to make, a much smaller salary at first. I mean, it was the same for us at Riderflex the first few years as a recruiting company. I mean, myself and my co-founder, same thing, right? We were making probably, 30% of what we could have made on the open market in a regular job, right? And then you just slowly increase that over time. So if you're an entrepreneur and you're listening to this episode, be ready for that, plan on it. You're probably not going to make what you could make in the open market in a regular job, but you got to be willing to sacrifice that. And if you can just push through 2, 3, 4 years, you will eventually find yourself making what you were making before, and then you're going to own your own business as well. But there is some sacrifice there, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's going to be the case for most people unless they get funded right away.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I can kind of walk you through the story over take about 10 minutes, but it's
go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
Yeah. So it was fascinating going from teaching business and entrepreneurship, like at the college level, and then stepping into it where it's like, you're actually in the thick of it. And so I understand all the numbers. I know the timelines and how long things take. And, I'm pretty good with a lot of the analytical skills. But the biggest shock to me was actually the emotions of being an entrepreneur. Because teaching entrepreneurs, steady, stable, you got that paycheck every 2 weeks, you're on health benefits. So all of a sudden it's like, you're trying to figure out licenses and you're trying to figure out which entity to structure it under. You're doing a lot of, you're trying to figure like, I have to do an NDA and I have to do partnership agreements and I have to do work for hire. So you're figuring out all these forms and then you're like, how do I find customers? And I remember a couple of our first pitches were just like, I was educating our clients. I was just like talking about, this is what we can do and this is where we're at. And for me, thankfully, one of my gifts is I'm a connector. So I love talking and sharing with people. So when I moved to the city, I just followed my game plan that I used to teach the students. And I was like, this is what I taught. I've never done it, but I'm just assuming it'll work. So I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I joined the Rotary Club. So you join a service club that's in line with your values. I joined a Toastmasters because I wanted to get better at public speaking. And the thing about Toastmasters is it allows you to communicate things the way that you want to communicate it, and just to be clear and straightforward and direct with people. And that was one of my struggles, because I tend to just talk in circles a lot more than I do now. But going through that process, and then you just have to kind of hit the bricks. Like you're out there on the, you're going to meetings, you're going to networking events. I found other connectors and mentors, and I just like, if you were in my spot, what would you do? And then I just followed their advice. So I found like Christina Davis, who's the president of the LAX Chamber, and then my Rotary president at the time, Gwen Vuchis. They would kind of tell me where to go, and I would just kind of follow what they did. So they were like, go to the government meetings. So I went and visited like the airport and Metro and the water district. I would go to any of those meetings. I started going to meetings at RAND, and then anything you get invited to. And the first year you just go to everything, and then you figure out like, what are the ones that have value? And then you kind of cut out about 80% of it. And then you just kind of lean into it. And pretty soon you get a breakthrough. So we had our first breakthrough client was we had a couple technologies out of UCLA where we did some graphics, and then we worked with the Nanosystems Institute, up there. So we kind of had this prestigious name behind one of the projects we did. Cool. And then I ended up getting on the video production bench with Metro. So we had our first government contract. And the first video series we did ended up going viral. It got talked about on the Today Show. So then we had something to talk about. It was this safety video. And so once you kind of have that, you just build momentum, and then you just find you have these little wins, and then you just share with the people you've been networking with. Yes. And it really takes a good 3 years before we finally hit a stride where we're even making enough money to kind of talk about.
Didn't you do something with McGillivray? Do you know Sean McGillivray?
Yeah. So McGillivray Freeman. We started working with his dad, Greg McGillivray. So we did, we've done like 3 projects with him so far. So we worked on Dream Big. We did the Hyperloop sequence. So I was working with David Israel at Hyperloop. So we did the model for their, when they did the port test. So we talked about like what the shuttle would look like, and then what it would morph into over the years. And then McGillivray Freeman saw that and wanted to add it into their video. So that's how we first got connected with them. And then we did a couple of videos for their American music or American history.
Nice
concept videos for that. Yeah.
Nice. He was on the podcast on the
awesome.
Podcast. Yeah, he was a guest. I saw that you were connected there.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You got to get into a stride. Great tip, by the way. As it relates to networking and going to events and meetings. Yeah, you can let that get overwhelming, and it can drain a lot of your time. You do have to eventually kind of cherry pick the ones that really have value. Great point. Yeah. Great tip for the listeners.
And one thing that, about the networking is there's so many of them that they seem like they don't have value, and you just sit there and you're there for like 2-3 hours. Like a lot of the government events, you'll sit there and it's like, it's mind numbing. You're like, when does stuff happen, and how do you break into this? But I think of my biggest clients, so Metro, the Water District, and then Gareth Evans over at Vecta. And for the Water District, we did 2 virtual reality tours. Like those are our biggest VR projects. And I ended up getting into those projects because I met this lady, Peggy Vogt, and I went in early to it and kind of talked to everybody. And then me and my business partner stayed afterwards, and there's like 5 people. And that's where I ran into Peggy, and I started talking to her and telling her like, this is what we're doing. This is what we want it to morph into. And she was like, I want to talk to you guys more. And so she invited us out to lunch. I found out later she was on the innovation committee at MWD, Metropolitan Water District. So she was able to pull us in, and that's how that kind of started that relationship, and met the rest of her team. And so it was like, things happen like that when you stay after or when you show up early. Yes. And the same thing with Gareth. We're sitting there at some just random water event or power event, and afterwards, like we were just sitting there having beers because there wasn't really a whole lot going on, and talking about ultra sports. And at the time, Gareth's like, hey, I'm a part of this company over here. We can't really use what you're doing, but let's keep in touch. And so I just kept in touch with them about every 6 months. And 3 years later, all of a sudden he's in a CEO role, and he's like, hey, we need help with this project. And it's just building those relationships early and staying in touch with them. And that's what, a lot of these projects, where they come out of, is that those trust relationships and those connections.
Yes. Couldn't agree more. By the way, another great tip there: show up early for these things. Always show up early, because there's a little side conversation that can happen before it gets started, and then stay after. Stay after, and that's where you meet people, right? Yeah, is showing up early and staying after for those events. My partner and I, as we built Riderflex, we would go to those. He's Scott, my co-founder. He's the biz dev side of it, and he does a great job of. He does what you do. Like he can work those rooms and meet people, and he'll drag me along, and I'll always say, oh my God, I hate going to these things, but they usually pay off. Networking is critical. Absolutely critical.
Yeah. One thing as a business leader, I've found, I know how long it takes to grow your skill set and grow out your businesses on average. And I'm like, how can you shortcut that? Like, what are those little cheats? And one of the things I found is when you first start, like, seek out mentors that are 5 years, 10 years, 20 years further than you in those careers, and start engaging with them. And so I started kind of finding people like, man, I wish I wanted to be like, there's certain aspects to their lives that I want to be like. And I'd reach out to them and was like, hey, can I take you out for dinner or for lunch or for coffee? And I started doing that, and I kind of built this pool of mentors around. And then I would take those same people out about every 6 months, and or anytime I was going through a major transition. And, you know, if you do that for 3 or 4 years, like, they know your story, they know the struggles you're going through. And I could always ask them those questions, like, here's this next leap I'm looking at taking. What do you see that I don't see? And if you were in my shoes, what decisions would you make? Because a lot of times we know what we know, but we don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And so you're making these decisions fairly blind. And having those mentors that have 5, 10, 20 years of experience, they can give you insight that we just don't have. And it saves you a lot of heartache and headache through the process.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. If you had to, you know, summarize 2 or 3, you know, pieces of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs, somebody listening to this episode, ready to start their own business. Let's say it's a service related business. We can tie it into what you do. They want to quit their job. They want to, you know, open up a marketing agency or whatever. They want to, you know, start their own plumbing business or recruiting firm, whatever it is. What are 2 or 3 things that you want to highlight for that listener right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things I tell people over and over is just the grit of it and just how hard it is. Like it's kind of like going in, it's like, you know, I want you to be aware of what you're getting into. And it's not so much the technical details and what you need to do. It's the emotions of it. And it's like you're signing yourself up for, you know, if you want this to work well, it's probably a 5 to 10 year journey before you get to where you want to go. And you just have to be consistent, and you have to kind of pour into it. And you have to be resilient with so many of the roadblocks along the way. You know, one of the things I always like to say is, like, you know, especially if you're pitching to clients, you know, a lot of times you end up landing about 20% if you're top at what you're doing. So if I'm talking to people, like, you know, if I talk to 20 people, I might land 3 to 4 projects. And so that's it, you know, and you know, I've had other people say, like, man, you're really good at what you do. And I was like, I'm failing 80% of the time. So I get told no so many times. I get things moving in the pipeline, and all of a sudden they shift directions. And so it's like, oh yeah, like, this is what success looks like. It's a lot of iterations and, you know, and missteps along the way, and people kind of shifting mid-process, and you know, and then being adaptable to that, and being able to pull yourself up as quickly as you can and move forward, and giving yourself grace sometimes when you don't. So I think a lot of it is the being consistent even when you don't feel good, and being consistent through the highs and lows, thinking outside the box, building out your network so you have people to talk to when you don't know where to turn.
Yes.
You know, so a lot of those kind of components to it.
It is super emotional, you know, not to scare people, but you will have, you know, some anxiety. You are going to wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, walking around at 3 a.m. in your living room saying, what the hell did I do? Why did I quit my job? Oh my God. I mean, you're going to have all that, right? I mean, you're likely you are going to have all that, unless you had a big pile of cash when you started, or you got, you know, funded. You're going to have all those moments. I had a guy tell me one time, he said, you know, you're never a true entrepreneur until you spend a few weeks waking up every day, looking outside to see if your car's still there and wondering if it got repossessed. You know, so yeah, super emotional, like you said. Totally agree. What's the plan for Lux, you know, long term? I mean, are you gonna, do you want to grow it into a big firm? Do you want to sell it? Do you want to merge? Do you want to be acquired? Are you happy with it being a lifestyle business for your family? What's the plan?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's interesting. Like when I first started with Nick, we kind of wrote out the business plan and kind of where we saw it then, and like 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. And one of the models I was looking at is Arup. It's an engineering company. And I'd always kind of liked the idea, you know, from there, our model would be a lot different, but similar kind of components, where I like the idea of building out studios with like 3 to 5 up to 8 member teams, and having places all over the world. So you start in LA, and then Seattle, Denver, somewhere over on the East Coast. And you cater each of the studios towards a particular bent. So one might be focused more on, you know, web design, one might be more on animation. And so you can kind of tap into different places. So right now if I was given, say, like $2 to $5 million in investment money, that's probably the jump I would take, is pulling together that core team of 3 to 5 and going aggressively after some different projects, and then looking at building up different satellite locations. One of the reasons I like that model versus building out a big company is I've watched some of my mentors that, they built out these huge agencies, and then they'll lose 1 or 2 of their main clients, and then they're stuck in half their lease, and they have to let go of half their staff. And it's like, you just watch these heartaches where you're like, man, they're just crushing it. And then 3 months later, you're like, oh man, like that was a bad decision. And it wasn't a bad decision. It was just the way that the economy, or the way the cards fell, it just didn't turn out well. And so,
if you're a service business like that, I mean, by definition, we are kind of consultants, right? I hate that word, but really, even as a recruiting firm, as a marketing agency, or whatever, as a lawyer, as a plumber, I mean, you're not going to have, most of the time, you're not going to have recurring revenue from a client forever, right? The clients are using us, or they're using our services for a project or for a period of time because they have an issue or whatever. And so there is always a risk like that for firms like yours and like mine, to where, you had a great client. I mean, we've done that many times at Riderflex. We help them. We'll put in 100 people into their business, including 5 or 6 HR people that end up doing recruiting for them internally. And then we don't have that client anymore. I mean, it's just, that's the nature of the beast, right? That's part of it.
And I don't know, recently it's, because things changed so much this last year and a half with COVID. So it was interesting to watch how our team morphed and transitioned. Because one of the things I look at doing is I build out these partnerships with clients and with creatives, and I'm always looking for creatives with like next level talent. And then when you find them, you just, you get to know them. And it's one of those, like, my four kind of traits I look for is like, do I like them? Do I trust them? Are they competent? And do they have integrity? And basically these are people I want to go out and have coffee with, or a beer. And, it's like, when I'm working with them, I want to have that open communication. And so you end up pulling, I pull in like guys who are, they're one of my, the guys on our team is the entrepreneur. He used to be an entrepreneur in resident at one of these consulting companies. I have a friend who got an Emmy for 360 video for it was a project capturing Everest. So he did a lot of the editing work. So very high end, creatives. And as soon as you meet them, like I take them out for coffee, you get to know them a little more. And it's like, hey, if I have a project come up over here, are you interested? Or are you interested in consulting? So I'll usually pull them in consulting at first and have them put in a few hours. And then if there are interesting projects for them, I just pull them in on it. And so that's a lot of how I build my team out.
I see.
Yeah. So it's a lot of just like, for me, it just feels like I'm doing work with my friends.
Well, that's right. It's so important, right? If you're not having fun and you can't enjoy the people you hang around, oh my God, so critical, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons my co-founder and I, Scott, have done well here over the last several years at Riderflex. Is same thing, right? I just like hang. I mean, he's a friend. Like, we have beers, we talk about, I don't know, our wives, our families, whatever. It's so critical. Couldn't agree more. Moving towards wrap up, let me ask you a few things here. How do you find the time to do what you do when it comes to your endurance stuff, right? An ultra athlete doing these major events, plus you're running your own business, which is, as you mentioned before, super hard. Plus you're married, which means you got to spend time with your wife. Plus you have 2 kids. Talk to us about your time management a little bit, and maybe a couple of tips.
Yeah. It's interesting because I listen to a lot of audiobooks and podcasts, and I've funneled in a lot of the way that I do my time management based on, I call it essentialism or minimalist. And it's how can I be as effective as possible with the least amount of time, but not just efficient, but effective. So it's like, because you can do a lot of stuff, but if you're not hitting the main things that are going to move you forward, you're just spinning your wheels. So I've been watching a lot, like I watch people, I talk to mentors, I read books. Some of the things that have really stuck is if I can have 3 to 4 days a week where I have 3 90-minute blocks, I can get more done in those 4 days than I could if I was working a 40, 50 hour sitting in an office job. So what I'll do is and I watched my old business partner would do this. He would block out 3 to 4 hours. And that's when he would do his creative chunk work, and he would schedule it like no one else, nothing got into that block of time. And so when I started doing that, all of a sudden, it's not that I was like twice as effective. I was like 3 or 4 times as effective during those blocks of time. So that's one of the things I do. Just kind of block out 3 90-minute chunks of time, 3 to 4 days a week. And then first thing in the morning, I do some journaling, and then I write down the top 10 things I want to get done for the day. And then I circle the top 3, and it's like, those are the must get dones. And then the rest of them, if I get to them, great. But if not, I'll just throw them on the next day. And so that, those 2 simple things, like setting up those 90-minute blocks of time, and then having a list of 10 items with the top 3 at the top of my list, like that's, and if you do that every day, you're moving in the right direction and you're getting things done. And
good stuff, Rob. Like you said, simple little things. You'd be surprised at how many people don't do that. You'll be surprised how many professionals I meet every day, and they just wake up and just wing it. They just start winging it, shooting from the hip every day. It's like, you can't do that. You're not going to be as effective. Like, you really, I know it sounds so simplistic to make a to-do list or a priority list for the day, but I am amazed at how many people don't do that. I really am. So yeah, great advice. And I do the same thing, by the way. And it's so easy. Most of us work remote these days. Just block out your calendar, right? Everybody uses things like Calendly or whatever you're using to let people see your availability. Just block out times. Just block it out. If you don't block it out, you're not going to get the work done. And then you're going to get phone calls, and you're going to check email 20 times a day. And then you're going to look at social media and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, your day's over. So great advice.
And I think one of the things is consistency. Like I find in ultra sports, I've been doing ultras for 20 years and taking on some of the world's toughest races. And I'm not fast. I'm not built as a strong runner. And yet I can do these events. And the main reason, like I attribute to my success, is the team I have around me. So I have an amazing support team, and then my consistency in the training. And the same thing goes, it's amazing how parallel that is to business. Like, if you have the right team around you and you're consistent in your disciplines, you just continue to raise up your game. And I found this term lately. I call it like increased capacity or defy capacity. And I find in ultras, like if you take on a monster, you end up shifting up in your ability level. Like you grow years in like a 2-3 week period of time. And so all of a sudden on the other end of, like the big change for me was a solo race across America. So it was a 12-day, 3,000 mile bike ride. And when I got done with that, it just opened up the doors to all these other events I could do. And I found that same thing with certain clients. Like all of a sudden you'll get this client offer and it's like, man, I've never done this before. This is totally outside of my comfort zone. And then you work with them for 6 months, or you work with them for those first like 3 months. And then after that, you have this completely different skill set than you did 6 months ago. Yeah. So stepping into that uncertain space and just, pouring your heart into it and being consistent. And then on the other side of it is like, oh yeah, I just, my capacity increased to something that I didn't even think was possible 6 months ago. But you have to lean into those uncomfortable situations.
Great advice. Can I ask you something about the endurance racing and the money / sponsorship? I'm always fascinated. I don't know. I'm totally ignorant to the whole process. But how do you have to fund all this by yourself? Do you get sponsors? Like, who pays for this stuff? Specifically, for example, I was listening to a podcast you did and where you were swimming from Catalina Island, right? I think. And I was listening. So you had a kayaker, and then there was a boat in front of you, and this and that. I'm like, okay, do you have to like pay for all that yourself? Do you get sponsored? Like, how does the finance part of it work, real quick? I'm curious.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And it's funny because so many people that aren't involved in ultra sports are like, oh, you guys are funded and sponsored, and that's what you do for your job. And I was like, no, that's where I spend about $20,000 to $30,000 of my personal money, and it's like that's why I'm working like odd jobs and taking on different projects on here to fund a lot of passions that we do. I find that ultra sports, if you've been doing it for a while, you start to get sponsorships, which sponsorships basically mean you pay less or nothing for certain gear items.
For certain gear. Yeah.
For gear. So like last year I got sponsored by Bashetta. So they sent me a frame. So I got to use one of their demo bikes. So instead of buying a $4,400 frame, I get that and I get to use and promote. But I find it's a lot of like, you get these sponsorship, but then you have to do a lot of promotion for them. And so you're almost like getting paid as their marketing person, but they're just giving you product stuff. But it's a really good trade for a lot of us that are just trying to get out there and get to the start lines. But at events like Race Across America, to have a crew. So I had like a 14-person crew, 12 days, flying them in, all the hotels, the food. Ours was about $23,000.
You pay, and you had to pay for all that. You paid for it yourself.
Yeah. So I did a friends and family fund round before that. So the organization I was working with, 3,000 Miles to a Cure. So we ended up raising a little over $20,000 for brain cancer research. Okay. And the way they do it, you work with their group and they would let us raise the money before the event for our event costs. And then a week out from it, any money raised after that went 100% to brain cancer research.
I see.
So and that's a model I've been using since then. I was like, oh, that makes sense. So it's like, I'll spend the year before it, like reaching out to people, seeing what sponsorships I can get to cover as much of the event cost as possible. And then during the event, 100% of whatever comes in goes to that organization and to that cause.
I see. Has your wife ever been like, hey, I don't, the 30,000, I want to go to something?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's one of the things that drew us together was, I think our values are so similar. We have very different activity levels, but our core values on kind of giving and travel and education, like that's where we spend our money. And that's where we spend a lot of our time.
Okay.
So it's just fun to have. I always call her kind of my journey pacer. Like we just go on these crazy adventures together, and been doing it for coming up on 7 years of marriage. So
is she super in shape as well, like you, super active?
She's super active. She's more the traveler. We've done. She talked me into doing the Camino. So we spent 30 days hiking 500 miles across northern Spain. We did that with our 1-year-old like 3 years ago. And
what? Hold on. I'm having a visual. You got a 1-year-old like in a backpack on your back, and you're doing. Are you serious?
Yeah. So we actually got we got sponsored by Bob Stroller. So they let us use one of their strollers, a demo stroller, and then so I pushed him in the stroller, and then we had a carrier. So we carried him probably 20% of the time. And then I pushed him the rest of the way.
What? Okay. What was your record for number of days without a shower? I'm just curious.
We pretty much have the albergues you stay in every night. So I shower every day. So I might have gone a day or two without, but not a whole lot.
I didn't know if this was like you're hiking in the forest like for like 5 days, no utilities or anything. That's cool though. That's a cool trip. Okay, great. Sounds like you guys have a wonderful relationship, and she is fully supportive of the endurance stuff you do, which is great.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is like, if you ask yourself what you want and you kind of have that vision, and then it's like, whatever it takes to get there, I'm just going to build that path to it. And I think that's what we do. Is like, oh, I want to do, like, my wife's next big thing. She wants to go to all the national parks. So we're looking at taking our 2 kids to all the national parks, and and over like this 2-year period. And so it's like, well, that's a huge commitment. It's like, yeah, but if it's something you want to do, like, is that something you can balance with work and with other stuff? And so you kind of ask those questions, and if it fits in with your whole life plan, like, let's just find a way to make this happen. And then you just start, moving towards the goal.
My wife always says, life is short, eat the cake.
Yeah.
If you had two last questions here, if you could call your 21-year-old self coming out of college, knowing what you know now, based on all of your experiences, would you tell him anything? Would you tell that young Rob anything?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's the same thing. It'd be that same voice that I keep telling myself, like, just lean in, take the risks, know that it's going to be hard, but it's, I always kind of like that. It's hard, but it's worth it. One of my buddies has a shirt that's like, it's going to get ugly, but it's going to get done. And so I think just that recognition that just because things are hard doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. In fact, it's usually the right path. And So I was like, with every opportunity, like take the risks. And one of the things I remember coming out of like high school and college, a visual I trained myself with was the 70, 80-year-old version of myself. When I come to a decision, am I going to regret doing it or not doing it more, regardless of how it turns out? Do I want to be the type of person that takes that or not? And there's certain things like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, doesn't feel right. But there's others like, man, this could lead to such a great opportunity. Even if it turns poorly, I would hate to not know where that road goes.
And by the way, when you are 70 and you're having that thought, you can't go back. It's not a movie. You can't press rewind and do it again. Right. So you better take the leap while you have the chance. Last question. If you had to put your core purpose in life into a sentence, and I wanted you to, let's separate your wife and children from that. Let's separate your wife and kids. And so if you had to define because that's kind of like the ultra core purpose over to the side. So let's move that over to the side. How would you define Rob's core purpose right now?
Yeah, that's one of those questions that goes kind of the core of who you are. And for me, like it's hard not to talk about my purpose without talking about my faith.
I understand.
And so I look at, I came to my faith when I was about 13 years old, and it was a complete shift in my psyche and opened up these doors. So a lot of that is, I look at like, how can I have the most impact in the world? And I work with a coach, and I was telling her that, like, I just want to go into this next season and have impact. And she was like, you're asking the wrong question. Like you're looking at the fruit of it versus where it stems from. And so I was realizing like, oh yeah, if I focus on how can I build my relationship as closely as possible with my God and my spirituality, if I pour into that understanding myself and how I work physically, mentally, and spiritually to the core of what's in there, I'll be the most effective. I'll be the most caring, the most loving, the most impactful. So focusing on the core of it versus focusing on the results. And it's been amazing. Like once I shifted that, I was like, of course that's the answer. And then you do that, and all of a sudden this fruit comes out of it, because you're not aiming for the fruit, you're aiming at what is that core part of this that will trigger those changes in my life. And I have these 3 words, kind of my defining principles that go forward, and it's joyful, tenacious, and hopeful. And so it's like, I just want to be full of hope, joyful, and then tenacious, like just approaching anything that I come into contact with, like what does completely overdoing this and taking this to that next level look like? And how can I do that? And with a smile on my face, and with hope.
Really good stuff, Rob. Really good stuff. I really appreciate you being on the Riderflex podcast.
Thank you.
You've shared some really awesome stuff. Appreciate it. I just want to mention to the listeners one more time, luxvirtual.com, luxvirtual.com. You can also look up Rob DeCou on LinkedIn if you wish. Robert on LinkedIn, right? I think. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Hang on the line here just for a second.